When it comes to film, I fell in love with film about 5 years ago, personally. I think it was sort of a friendship before that, but it got a little more serious. It's a weird time to do that, though, because all you hear in the industry these days is film is dead, or isn't Kodak bankrupt? But every 6 months, there's a new digital camera coming out, and the film world is just agog with all of these different kinds of options and formats, and we have the Red camera and all of that entails. We have the Arri Alexa, which is high-end industry standard video camera. We have what we have here in the front of you, Canon DSLR, which is increasingly favored, especially by documentarians, but by people in the independent film world as a very cheap and high-quality video imaging source. And there are a lot of good aspects to digital, I think, as we've talked about. For one thing, the lack of consumable media on digital formats is a huge boon to people who are trying to make projects on an independent budget. You can now, if you have $1,000, go to the store and buy a very high quality camera and go out and shoot perhaps an entire feature film, and you can edit it all by yourself without having to really interact with any external resources or infrastructure. And it's debatable whether or not that's a good thing. Sometimes a system of checks and balances and you having to actually go through the paces is a good thing for filmmakers because it tends to refine the product a little bit. But at the basic level, it is a democratizing influence, right? People, the man on the street, person on the street, is able to have their hands on very high quality imaging tools, and that is definitely a good thing. The same thing goes for platforms of distribution, right? We have YouTube, of course, coming up on 10 years, and it has really made a big difference in very, very tangible ways. We've seen a lot of political upheaval, for one thing, spurred on by the virality of social media and videos as a component part of that. So it can be a system that uproots governments and seeks to get to the bottom of issues. And it can succeed where other more infrastructure-intensive formats, such as film, might not. At the same time, we're losing something else. And I suspect that some of you might be here because there's something you like about film. You might not know what it is, and I'm not sure that I know what it is, but I think a lot of people might describe it as a richness or a warmth. People come to us and say things like that. Tactility as well. Whatever it is, it keeps you attached to film, despite the difficulties of the medium, despite the costs, despite the sort of trickiness of working with it. It scratches easily, and sometimes you have to go through an entire roll of film and you don't know what you've got. You can't, you don't have that instant replay sort of thing going on. But we propose that what exists in film and not in digital video is the indexicality of the profilmic scene and of the process. So, I'm using indexicality in this sense, taking from the American pragmatist philosopher Charles Saunders Peirce, and it describes the mark or influence on a sign made by the subject that it represents. So, for instance, a footprint in the snow is an index of a person's treading there. A weather vane is an index of the direction that the wind is blowing. It's the third member of a triad, which also includes symbols, which are a representation that's agreed upon by convention or prior specific agreement, and then also icons, which are representative because they, in some characteristic, resemble the sign that they're representing. Film is an index of its subjects because the image-making process is a physical and chemical one. Light strikes the film's emulsion, inducing structural changes in the silver halide or other similar silver salt that's contained therein. At every stage of duplication, that shape and form are retained, which is sort of like making a mold of a footprint on the ground. Because digital video is computational, however, the images we see are reconstructed out of lines of numbers. So like a Peircean symbol, rather than an index, these codes only become an image because we've agreed that they do so, and that's the convention. They bear at their core the fragility and impermanence of all human constructs. But don't get me wrong, film is in trouble. Film is not dead, but it's on the ground kicking and screaming. Raw film stock production in North America, Kodak is the only remaining producer, with Fuji stopping operations last year. Canada only has one remaining film lab, and today we'll dedicate this talk to Alpha Cine Labs in Seattle, which is probably, what time is it? At this very moment, closing at the last day of film processing and printing, one of the only remaining labs on the West Coast. You'll believe me when I tell you that the format is in decline. It's troubling not only because of the lofty academic reasons that I've just been spouting about, but also because it represents a very serious future archival problem. Super 8 and a lot of other film formats specifically designed for amateur use have kept around quite well for the last, well, pretty close to 50 years since the introduction of the format, and longer than that for single 8mm and 16mm. The great thing about film is you can kind of kick it in a box, and as long as it doesn't get set on fire or flooded, for the most part, it stays the way it was. It sometimes gets a little scratched up. Sometimes you get a little bit of what's called a vinegar syndrome, where the base begins to change chemically. But for the most part, by and large, films that were shot 50 years ago and processed and left in a cool, dry place continue to exist the same way. Once we got into the age of videotape, there's sort of a phenomenon, and I think Jen might touch on this a little bit, that I call dubbing culture, where all of a sudden we became able to reproduce our images in a way that was never possible before. When people were using Super 8 to make home movies, I think for the most part, from what people have told me, they were very conscious of the fact that the film that they made was a reversal print, or was a reversal film, and it was the only copy of said film. Very expensive, therefore, to have it duplicated or transferred to another format, and by and large, people didn't do that, so they just kept the film. It wasn't really a thing that you threw out because, like a paper photograph, it was kind of the only, it was the one of its kind. When we suddenly had videotapes and VCRs, and we could kind of hook them back and forth, this started an idea and trend that persists to this day, that there's always another copy. So, you know, people say this a lot in the age of the internet, right? People say it's in the cloud somewhere. So it's great. It's like there are multiple copies, and we can make them all really cheaply, which is great for dissemination of information really quickly. But if somebody else always has the copy, how do we get access to it? And are we sure that they still have the copy? So that's sort of a problem as far as archival is concerned, in that if we go beyond just one copy, we are no longer certain of which copy we have to preserve. So somewhat unintentionally, film created a pretty good archival format in that it represented exclusivity to a certain extent. It's also a pretty good shelf life material. You know, acetate stocks tend to last for a long time, as I said, polyester stocks even more so. Nitrate stocks tend to turn into goo, but nobody's made those for over 50 years, so it's not really a problem. But in the modernization crunch of the last 20 years, while we've been hard at work attaining higher quality for lower cost, we've really neglected long-term viability in terms of our media storage and archival options. So, unequivocally, there is no digital storage system that has proven past 5 or 10 years. Nothing has lasted yet for the amount of time that we've been observing it, and you know, rotational hard drives are exceptionally prone to failure, as probably a lot of you know. This is not to say that we'll never come up with anything, you know, as far as a digital archival format is concerned. It's just that we haven't figured anything out yet, and it doesn't seem to be rapidly forthcoming. So it seems a little bit premature to dispense with an entire side of a format that has long-term proven viability, in my estimation. These weaknesses in digital data archival sort of bring up the Achilles heel of the digital data phenomenon. The symbol-based code structure of a digital file is immensely interdependent. So failure in a single sector of a digital data file can corrupt and make unviewable an entire set of texts, an entire set of images, an entire audio file, an entire movie. At the same time, film sits in a box, gets a scratch, it's a little water damage, dry it out, make a copy of it. So digital data storage is an efficient, cost-effective, and high-quality option under the right conditions, and we have no qualms about the fact that commercially viable products will be carried forward through data migration strategies, which ensure digital data is properly maintained in duplicates and migrated to new devices when that technology is made available. But that's for feature films and television shows and commercial advertising products, right? The biggest problems arise for unintentional and non-commercial media, like home movies and news files and things like that. These represent our most significant primary documents. And in a century or 50 years, these are what are going to be really valuable to researchers. So, maybe for instance, there's a film on the festival circuit now called Our Nixon, which some of you may have heard of, which is composed in the vast majority of the images are sourced from Super 8mm footage taken by 3 of Nixon's top aides. So it essentially, to sort of sum up that section, is there is no way that a hard drive in a closet is going to come out as well after 40 years as a reel of Super 8. So what I see in my sort of dystopian future world projection is that we're going to have preserved only the most commercially viable images in 50 to 100 years from this period. Only the people who had the resources and technical know-how to keep up with that digital evolving landscape of data archivals and storage. Home movies and unintentional media are going to be totally lost in the bargain. So our advocacy for film stems not from a Luddite's desire to break down the New Order and revert to primitive days, but rather from the sincere desire to keep multiple options for image making alive. It's invaluable that individuals consider the life and whereabouts of their media, and so that's why we're really thrilled to watch Homebodies shortly. Without that interest, we have a palpable worry that in 50 to 100 years we'll look back on this as a void, as a lost generation of media, where the infighting between different formats meant that we didn't get to keep anything. So.